Hi, it's me again. I apologise in advance for what might turn out to be kind of a waffly, unprepared video. I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff here. So I'll just sit back, relax in my lazy boy and just talk. Now, something that us ex-witnesses hear quite a lot from Jehovah's Witnesses, probably at the point in our life when we're still a witness and we're just having doubts and questioning the organisation, and quite often we get well-meaning witnesses that might say things to us, but like, where else would you go? You know, what other organisation provides what Jehovah's organisation does? You know, what Jehovah's Witnesses that do. You know, they say things like, well, we know it's an imperfect organisation, but it's the closest thing to the truth. So they're well-meaning when they say things like that, but they have this conception in their head that's planted there by the organisation, that there must be an organisation that you have to join, you have to belong to it. But that's not really what the scriptures say, is it? When you think about it, Jehovah had an organisation, didn't he? In the Hebrew scriptures, we see the nation of Israel. They formed an organisation that was under a covenant arrangement with Jehovah God. Okay, so that was an organisation, and that's where Jehovah's Witnesses actually got their name from. Their modern name, Jehovah's Witnesses, was drawn from that time back then. That's where Jehovah said to the nation of Israel, "You are my witnesses." So the nation of Israel at that time were Jehovah's Witnesses, weren't they? So modern day Jehovah's Witnesses adopted that name, Jehovah's Witnesses, back in the 1930s. It wasn't something that the organisation didn't actually start out as an organisation, and it certainly didn't have that name either. When you think about it, you know, so Jehovah had an organisation, the nation of Israel, but what happened to that? It failed, didn't it? They did not live up to their covenant. They did not live up to the law. And when Jesus came, he ended the law and he instituted a new covenant. So, and we know in 70 CE, of course, the nation of Israel, the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. So God's favour had gone away from this nation, from this organisation. Did Jesus set up another organisation? I don't think he did. And in fact, if you go to, I think the very first Watchtower magazine that Charles Taze Russell wrote, and actually I should have, I'll put it in the description below, or will I? Yeah, I'll make a note of it, and maybe quote what he said there. But he had an article there that addressed the question as to what would they call themselves, these ones who were like following Russell. And because you had the Baptists, the Methodists, the Lutherans, all these different denominations, and he basically scoffed at the idea of denominations, and he says shall be called Christians, because that's what Jesus' followers in the first century were called. They were called Christians because they followed Christ. So they weren't followers of an organisation or a denomination. Sectarianism, or the division, started very early. It started in the first century and was already existing when the New Testament was written. You'd be familiar with what Paul said when he was talking about one saying that they follow Apollos, others saying they follow Paul, and different ones. So there was already sectarianism developing amongst the first century Christians. And Paul said not to do that, because it wasn't those people that died for them, it was Jesus. And that was what their commonality was, the good news about Jesus. And they should put those differences aside and be united in spirit. But we saw, even from the first century, the sectarianism just grew and grew and grew. And I remember watching a documentary on TV, which was very, very interesting. And it was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE by the Romans. And apparently at that time there were numerous Christian sects within the city. And this documentary didn't go into the warning that Jesus gave in the scriptures about fleeing to the mountains when you see Jerusalem, surrounded by pointed sticks and things. But it did say that these various sects in Jerusalem, they did not flee. They were destroyed along with others in the city, because they all said that, as this documentary put it, the man of war is with us. They were referring to Jesus. I might have not got the words exactly, but it was along those lines. So each of these different groups all thought that they had the truth, they had it right. And as a result, none of them actually heeded Jesus' warnings. Perhaps the ones that did have their lives spared were the ones that were not associated with any of these sects. So what did Jesus set up if he didn't set up an organisation? He must have come across to the Jews as quite a rebel, really, and quite a revolutionary, because they, for a time, of course, they would preach, the Christians would preach in the synagogues, to fellow Jews, but they didn't have places built for Christians to meet in. Like today, the organisation shows off about all the kingdom halls and assembly halls and their headquarters and all these things. Jesus never established anything like that in the first century. They used to meet in fellow Christians' homes for teaching, for encouraging each other, and for eating together and commemorating or celebrating the memorial together. They were in people's homes, not some dedicated place, building or organisation. I like to think of them as being free Christians, and that's how I describe myself when I left the organisation, that I was a free Christian now, not associated with a particular denomination, sect, or organisation. So the only stipulation that Jesus made in the first century, of course, was that Christians, they needed to come to him. And Jehovah himself said, or the scriptures say, that, Jehovah said, this is my son, listen to him. And Jesus himself said, come to me, not go to an organisation. Come to me, I will refresh you. And we're very familiar, as Jehovah's Witnesses, Peter's words to Jesus when quite a few of Jesus' followers couldn't handle what he was saying about blood, about eating and drinking, eating his flesh and drinking his blood, and quite a few of them left off following him. And Jesus asked Peter if he was going to do the same thing, and Peter basically said, who else would I go to? You have sayings of everlasting life. But the Jehovah's Witnesses have added to Peter's words there, really, and quite often in the literature it's not, they have Peter saying, where else should I go, rather than to whom else should I go. So witnesses have in their brains that they must go somewhere, not to some person, not to Jesus, but where they must go somewhere. But Jesus wasn't saying that. Christians, the covenant exists between Jesus' followers and himself. It's not tied up with being part of an organisation or a nation or anything. I think Paul wrote about it being a covenant, the law to be written on hearts, on fleshly tablets, a one-on-one relationship between the Christian and Jesus, and not in connection with being part of an organisation or a nation under the law like the Jews were. So that's my take on it. But I think there's lots of indications from Jesus' own words that put his followers on guard about being drawn into organisations that claim to have Jesus or to know where he was, sort of thing. In Matthew chapter 24, he was talking about, false Christs and false prophets arising and misleading many, even the chosen ones. So, and he said that there would be ones that would say, see here or see there, here is the Christ, he's out in the wilderness or he's in the inner chambers. So claiming to know where Jesus was and that he was with them. And so this sectarian kind of thing developing, he said not to go after those ones, not to believe them. And I see that as a strong indication that he was saying that in future times there would be divisions, there would be ones professing that they alone have the truth, they have the true Jesus, come over here, and others over here saying the same thing, saying no, just follow me, come to me. So one thing that sticks out in my mind, and I did post something on my Facebook page recently about it, was back in the 1870s, Charles Taze Russell wrote a book, and the title of it was The Time Is at Hand. And of course we know that lots of people started reading Russell's writings and subscribing to his magazine, because he had a publishing company and money was made from selling the magazines, and he acquired quite a good following, and which evolved into the organisation that we have today. It had a hostile takeover by Rutherford in 1916 after Russell died, and then a succession of presidents after that, and numerous changes were made to the teachings and the organisation arrangement as a whole. But he had quite a lot of followers, and it just astounds me that the scriptures, Jesus specifically warned that when someone says the time is at hand, he says do not follow them. And this is exactly what Russell wrote, the time is at hand. And of course the early history of the Jehovah's Witnesses was all about claiming that Armageddon was any day now. The time is at hand. The world has ended, the world will be destroyed, the government's brought to ruin, and God's kingdom will start ruling and the 1,000-year reign will begin. It was all about that, 1874, and then 1914, 1925, 1975, and it didn't happen, did it? So we see the pure folly of following those who say the time is at hand after Jesus had said not to follow them. So I find that very interesting. What else was I going to say? I think that's about it. I have a feeling there's one other thing I was going to say. Anyway, to those who say that Jehovah's always had an organisation and you must belong to an organisation, and the Watchtower magazine itself has stated, come to Jehovah's organisation for salvation. No, that is not what the scriptures teach. Jesus said, come to me. And for those who think that you have to have an organisation to accomplish the preaching work, and that's simply not true. You don't need that. And while I was talking, it just started to come to me what I was going to say. Oh God. So I was talking about this is what happens when you get to the mid-50s. God, come to Jehovah's Organisation for Salvation. It's gone again. Anyway, if I remember, I will mention it in the description, I think. Okay, bye.